Good morning, everybody. We're going to take a look at photosynthesis notes. So if you've been paying attention these last couple of days, we've had some beautiful sunlight. And what light is it's actually made up of the visible light spectrum, or the colors of the rainbow. So white light as we know it, sunlight or light from a light bulb, is actually made up of all of the colors of the spectrum, which is why when white light passes through a prism, we can see the entire rainbow as it bends and goes through that prism. So again, sunlight is white light, and white light is composed of all of the different colors of the visible light spectrum. So now that we have the colors of the visible light spectrum looked at, why in the world is this important? Well, because plants actually need light for photosynthesis. So there's something called chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is a green pigment that's found in plants, and it absorbs the light for photosynthesis. It's found in these little thylakoids, which look like stacked pancakes, and we'll see those in another picture. Because plants have a green pigment, mainly in their leaves, they will actually reflect that green light to our eyes. That's how we see the green color, and they will absorb the other light colors. So the reds, the oranges, the blues, the indigos, and the violets, those other colors are actually then absorbed. So again, we see in the picture, the one that's right down here, we see that the violets and the blues are highly absorbed. So here you go here, they're highly absorbed, which is why the peaks up here are so high. And we also see that the reds and the oranges are also in the same boat. They are actually being absorbed quite a bit. But if you look in the middle, the yellows and the greens, we aren't seeing those big peaks. So the yellows and the greens have a little bit of absorption because, again, green pigmentation is going to reflect that color to your eye and not absorb it. So greens and yellows are being reflected. So plants don't need those particular light waves. So in the lab, you played with light filters, and if you blocked certain colors with filters, like only letting blue light come through, you were going to put the plant in different situations. So if you put a green light on the plant, no light would actually be absorbed. Everything would be reflected, and your poor plant would not survive. It would reflect all the light away and wouldn't be able to do photosynthesis because, again, it reflects green light. So we would see different factors playing a role in that. So hopefully you paid attention to the different conditions that you created when you made your lab plant. So photosynthesis takes the light energy from the sun and converts it into a chemical energy that then is used by the plants as a food source. There are two parts to this process. There's the light reaction, and then there's the Calvin cycle. Can you guess which one actually uses like light? Yeah, it'd be the light reaction. So you should know what goes on in photosynthesis. We need to know what comes in, which is this side. We need to know what is created, which is this back end. You are not expected to have memorized any of these numbers. So again, we have the reactants, which are right here. Carbon dioxide and water and sunlight come in, perform the reaction, and create the products of sugar and oxygen. Okay, and this sugar is glucose. So this is the process of photosynthesis. You should know the equation, what goes in and what goes out, but again, you don't need to know the actual numbers. And here's a little bit of a rundown of this. This is the chloroplast. So it's a chloroplast of the plant. Here are the thylakoids. Again, I told you they looked like little stacked pancakes. And a light reaction takes place on this side, and the Calvin cycle takes place on this side. So the light reaction in the Calvin cycle, if you remember back to the equation, water's right here, and carbon dioxide come in to the plant, as well as sunlight, which is needed. And there's a byproduct of oxygen and glucose that's created at the end of photosynthesis. And we'll go through this chart a little bit further later. So let's talk about the light reaction. The light reaction starts with the chloroplast absorbing sunlight. So chloroplasts, again, are found in things like plants. They're also found in bacteria and even algae, and they start the process of that photosynthesis. The light energy is then converted to a chemical energy. Energy from this process is stored as something called ATP or NADPH, which is a fancy way of just saying energy molecules. So again, we store this stuff as energy, and when water comes into the leaf, the crazy thing is that the H's and the O's that make up water, because water, again, if you take a look right here, is H2O, that energy rips the H's and the O's apart. The O's get released up to the atmosphere as a waste because plants don't need oxygen, but thankfully we do. And the H's stay inside the chloroplast and are actually used for the next portion of the process. The next stage is called the Calvin cycle. Energy in the form of ATP and NADPH is used to make new bonds with carbon dioxide that's coming into the leaf. And that binds with those H's that we had from the water that were ripped apart during the light reaction. And the C's and the O's from the carbon dioxide and the H's from the first process all come together and form C6H12O6, which is the sugar called glucose. And we can see this process happening here. CO2 comes in. Okay, the energy helps the NADPH and ATP. And then all of a sudden we start to create our sugar on the back end. Here's our sugar here. And we're going to produce all this fun and fancy stuff, or food for the plants. So here's the big rundown. If you take anything from this PowerPoint, you should understand this particular slide. Light, water, and carbon dioxide must come in to your plant. Oxygen and sugar in the form of glucose come out of the plant. Okay, on the light reaction side, we have water coming in and we have light coming in. When that light and that water react, the H's and the O's get ripped apart. The O's get released as oxygen off into the atmosphere. Again, that benefits us. And it's a waste product for the plant. And then those H's continue on and they start to pass through this process. So they start to head on and continue and create energy. And that energy turns this lovely wheel. And there's another gear attached to that. So now we're on to the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes carbon dioxide, spins it through this wheel. As it turns to the wheel, it picks up the H's and then creates the glucose at the end. The glucose has carbon in it. Okay. It's a carbon byproduct. The Calvin cycle begins with a C, and carbon dioxide begins with a C. So everything involved in the Calvin cycle begins with a C. So the CO2 is used to make the glucose at the end. Okay. And then the light reaction obviously uses the light. If you still have any questions on this topic, please feel free to let me know.